Mega Man, Jimmy Easy. Come on.
Welcome to Advocacy Help Desk, a network of advocacy leaders sharing best practices and new ideas via this free podcast to help everyone in government affairs get better at their advocacy craft and having a lot of fun while doing it. Now to today's great show.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Advocacy Help Desk. We are a group of advocacy professionals who like to talk about all things advocacy, all things PAC, all things just business of DC, everything in general, politics. We touch on it all. We've done some really great shows over the last 6 months. And thanks for everybody that's written in with questions and ideas. And can you touch on this? Can you touch on that? It's always great hearing from folks and hearing, just all the different ideas that folks have. In terms of today's episode, just a quick background. I am Brian Fredkin. I'm CEO of Spark Influence, an advocacy and engagement platform. I'm very excited to have with me today Nick Pisarno as another week's co-host. Nick, how are you doing today?
Very good. I got my vaccine for Moderna, so I'm excited to hopefully be venturing outside for the first time in 13 months. But I'm just super pumped. I'm not tired yet, although I do slightly feel that is coming.
The arm pain was number one. That thing hit like 20 minutes later. My arm was on fire, but that's great to hear.
I play tennis, and the first thing that asked me is which arm. I'm like, I'm a righty, not righty.
There you go, buddy.
So that's important. I can hit the tennis courts tomorrow. But I'm excited to be here with our guest, Bruce Mehlman, who is the co-founder of a very prominent bipartisan lobbying shop in DC, and is also a thought leader amongst both people that are interested in kind of the intersection between business and politics, but just general. He's a real communicator and convener of great ideas. And so Bruce is well known kind of in the lobbying community. And one of the reasons why I asked him on is because I've been getting some of these questions from some of our listeners about, we haven't had too many like true relationship, contract lobbyists on the program in a while. And so when I thought about who might be someone that can bring that insight, that perspective, I immediately thought of Bruce. So thank you so much for joining us today.
No pressure.
That's right. That's right.
Good introduction. Obviously Bruce has spoken at the council's events for a while now. And we were just actually talking that he has his own series of Zoom casts that he's been leading. And just kind of generally, I know this pandemic has changed. I'm trying to make sure that these notifications don't come in, but we updated Mac and they're not helping. Some of these kind of Zoom casts that you mentioned that you're leading, how has this pandemic really changed the way that you can kind of convene audiences and reach out to maybe groups that you haven't been able to engage with in the past?
Well, first, thank you both for having me here. It's always fun to get to visit with people and watch real time what a vaccine does to a person's face over an hour and a half after he got it. Some accuse me of toxic positivity. I'm definitely a silver linings person. Whether it's more time with your dog or exercising instead of commuting. But professionally, one of the biggest has been taking what I used to do, which would be I would have authors of interesting books. Mm-hmm. And of course, they'd have to be in DC. And it was probably not people on the New York Times bestseller list because, we can't fit enough people in our conference room to make that a good use of their time on a book rollout of a big book. Mm-hmm. And the people I'd invite had to be in DC. The quantity had to fit in my conference room or maybe in a restaurant. It was a high friction, high cost, low volume affair. And the first one was with an author named Pete Singer. And I realized, we realized let's turn it into a virtual Zoom thing. But it occurred to me, he's a futurist. He's a really smart guy. All my buddies who are in California, venture capitalists or tech clients or college friends or people who are up in New York, people I'd never invite to a book event because there's no way they were going to come to Washington, at lunchtime for a random book event. I could invite them.
Yeah.
And so I ended up with about 100 guests, the most we'd ever had for that thing. And I decided, well, heck, I'm going to lean in. And so not only who I get to invite, but who I invite as my guests. So I've had Ursula Burns and David Petraeus and Melody Hobson and Adam Grant and all of these cool authors and friends who I would never ask them to take a half hour on top of flying to Washington and spending time, but it's a much easier ask, and it's a lot easier to convene an audience. And so that's been a real beneficial change, and one I'm hoping sticks.
Yeah, we that was one of the things that we talked about at the beginning of COVID, was sort of, while circumstances change, the passion that these folks have for the topics doesn't, right? And so the idea that now we can make these things more accessible to a larger group, you've seen that succeed. I mean, associations, others are also starting to see that too, in terms of the getting, it's about breaking down those barriers. And so you're able to then have these folks come together in ways that you hadn't thought of. So what's next? You talk to the futurists. I mean, what's next? No, how do you see that continuing in a hybrid kind of fashion moving forward?
Well, look, that's one of the great questions, and one I think a lot about. I can't wait to go back to having lunch with people in restaurants, normal, not turkey sandwich with my dog at my feet. Yeah. And I love Zoom. It's the best product of the video conferences by 1,000-fold. I don't want to spend 8 hours a day on Zoom in the future, the way I have been in the past. Right. But I definitely bet I'm going to have, an hour or two every couple of days where you can gather large groups of folks. It's definitely it's superior to a conference call in so many ways. Why would we ever walk it back? The fly-ins in the lobbying profession, a fly-in is a thing. It's an important thing. It's valuable to get people from the district. It's a bear. I mean, there are people who have really made an art out of what is just a really high friction, high cost, challenging effort. A Zoom in is super duper easy. Yeah. And I got to believe every member of Congress in the future will have video conference capability far closer at hand. And while they also don't want to, they still would rather talk to a human in a room, which is more satisfying. If you said we've got now not 4 people from the district who've flown in, but 40 people who are Zooming in, you bet they'll be on Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see that too. We see that too, just with the idea of the personality that shows from behind them, right? In terms of, it's not everybody's getting dressed up and going up to the hill and putting on their best face. It's everybody's being more relaxed. And I can see the dog behind you, right? Nick's dog runs through the shot all the time. It's great. It's always funny. Like things like that, where you get a better picture of who these people really are, rather than just who they want you to think they are. And there's more of an authenticity there.
It's a different kind of connection. And we've been asking, the Congressional Management Foundation did a great study around this, asking just policymakers and their staff, do you see these, Zoom meetings continuing post-pandemic when COVID-19 subsides? And that there's a yes. We've asked 150 senior executives in government relations where they think that that's going. And they also see that this is just not a temporary thing, but that there's still going to be these really high quality times where you get together face to face. You do a fundraising trip that's still going to happen. Those types of relationship building, I think, is going to continue in DC. It's just really interesting to see how, like you said, with fly-ins, how companies and associations have pivoted really quickly. I remember when I was on the Hill, I didn't have a laptop. And I know most of my friends that are on the Hill, LDs, chiefs of staff, they didn't have a laptop pre-pandemic. And so, now every single staffer has a laptop. They have Zoom installed on their software, all of those types of things. And so it's become a lot, easier. And we actually, in DC, we normally hold 100 events a year between conferences, webinars, and workshops. We were looking at this, like, what does this mean for us? And we actually outfitted our entire office during the pandemic to make sure that video conferencing is really easy. So there's actually 6 cameras in our conference room now, our small 40-person conference room. There's 6 different cameras to make sure that you can, capture speakers at different angles. There's lighting that's professional grade for our speakers that are going to be up the front. There's microphones throughout the place. And so it's just taking a look at that. Previously, I work in the UK, and it was struggling to even hear some of my colleagues on these conference calls, never mind see them. And I think that is going to be a big change as well.
Well, and look, that makes government relations no different than most other sectors and industries.
Yeah.
It's a report, I do my quarterly reports. The one I did 2 ago was called The Great Acceleration. Yeah. And the idea was, and I still believe that, a lot of the pre-existing trends, we were getting more digitized. We were seeing more nationalism. We were becoming a more diverse society, but one fighting more. A lot of these pre-existing trends have accelerated, and the digital transformation was always a thing, and it was going to be a thing, but it was a many years thing, and now was a couple of months thing. Your example of your conference room is a great example, and when all's said and done, part of what people love about you is you guys are still going to have a conference or two in really nice places, because people like to get away, and frankly would love to get away right now from their homes and from their families, just to, there's still a greater ability to think, and it's those one-off conversations in the hallway, or you grabbing a drink on the lawns. You'll still have those, but rather than say having 3 of those, maybe you'll have 2 of those and 8 virtual events where people get all of the educational value and a lot of the ideas. Just, you lack some of the networking maybe, but we're probably going to figure out on Zoom how to be increasingly better at networking concurrent with these events too.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of shift a little focus, and I agree with that. One of the things that you're really known for is your, obviously, the PowerPoint kind of deck, these presentations that you also give to different groups. And I think they come out quarterly, and we always share them with our members. And if you're not reading that, I mean, the folks that are constantly tweeting out and sharing them, it's an amazing group that you've kind of cultivated that Thanks. Really, look every, couple of months for that deck. They want to know what are the trends, going forward. And something that you've touched on a couple of times is kind of what is the future of the Republican Party. We had, David Fromm speak at our board meeting last week, and that was actually the topic. And it was really interesting to hear his perspective. But I'd love to kind of, as you're a former Republican, staffer, what kind of is your thoughts on how this is changing, and the interplay between how business is kind of also pushing some of these changes to see, are there going to be more business-friendly Republicans who are maybe business-friendly towards small business, but a little bit more, aggressive in policing and regulating big businesses? What's your take on this?
Well, I'd also love to hear what David Fromm had to say. Maybe you can tell me next.
I will send you the recording.
Brilliant.
The great thing about digital.
Look, both parties have been in civil wars, both trying to decide who they want to be. To me, the driver is certainly broader than one person. It's broader even than one technology, say social media. What I think is going on, contrasting and comparing where we are to where we've been historically, is the policies, the institutions, and the parties of the 20th century aren't making people feel protected against the realities of the 21st century. It's technology, it's globalization, it's rapid demographic change in society. And that's leading to the populist movements, the Bernie on the left, the Trump on the right, where people are saying, hey, this system that doesn't seem to change, it's failing. It failed me. I'm not Elon Musk, and I'm not Jamie Dimon. I'm somewhere in between those guys. And I don't feel like, whether it's trade policy or these other things. And so in that regard, both policies have these kind of anti-establishment populist uprising, and that's where a ton of the energy is. The Democrats, seemingly in picking Joe Biden, concluded, let's take the populist energy, make that the policies, but put a much more moderate face on it in Joe Biden, a calm, good old Uncle Joe kind of thing. And it feels like they're taking care of the moderates with the rhetoric and the style, and they're taking care of the progressives with the policies. Big business is in agreement with some of the social policies, but definitely not in agreement with plenty of the economic policies. The Republican Party, had a similar thing, but in that case, the populists won. And so, Marco and all the kind of the establishment folks sort of canceled each other out. Trump won with a plurality, but then quickly captured more than 90% approval and still retains crazy high approval, given not only did he lose an election due to own goals on Twitter, but the insurrection of January 6th, which should have been unsurvivable on any rational planet, predicated upon an untruthful claim of a stolen election, it ought to be over. And yet, Trumpism is very much the higher energy part of the GOP. Does it last? Maybe. Maybe you find the next generation able to say, all right, stop the kind of the crazy tweets, stop the stuff that's just truly off the charts, not, QAnon kind of conspiracy crazy, sure, and be tough on the border, be skeptical about globalization, be anti-establishment, anti-big in that regard. And that feels like where, if you had to bet at the moment, that feels more likely than a Reagan restoration where Liz Cheney, purges all of the other voices. Mm-hmm. It suggests to me that big business is a bit homeless right now, and that neither party thinks their mission or proper role is to help take care of America's most successful multinational corporations.
Yeah, and I kind of think that there's almost, if you look at specific issues where the far left and the far right kind of unite, you're starting to see, like, around tech regulation, there's becoming an alliance between folks like Josh Hawley and Elizabeth Warren, and you start to see that in other areas around trade, and I think that you're going to be looking at that in healthcare potentially as well, and in financial regulations, which is something that I think you previously would never have thought of 15, 20 years ago. That a sitting Republican senator would be calling for more regulation on a certain industry.
Sure. You're totally right. Look, the $1,400 checks originally were a Rubio-Hawley recommendation that the Democrats and the President Trump embraced, and became core to the package that got passed in whatever Q1 this year.
Mm-hmm. You talked kind of like in your last set of PowerPoints that we're operating in a really low trust world, and I'm constantly kind of explaining how there is an opportunity for businesses to step up here, right? Because they're fairly trusted comparatively to media and politicians, and even what they're hearing from social media. What are you seeing the kind of the role going forward for businesses and making sure folks are getting vaccinated, are building consensus around these big policy issues like infrastructure reform, those types of things? Are you seeing businesses kind of step up, and is there any backlash to that you think could be coming down the pike for them?
Yes, and yes. So first, businesses definitely stepped up during the pandemic, and part of their success was, they're local, they're more immediate. In the same way you saw mayors and governors often have higher approval ratings. One of the realities these days is, you're more likely to trust your family and your friends and your boss. It's not totally dissimilar to how people don't like Congress, but do like their member of Congress. I don't know what that beep was. They often don't like, business, but do like their business or their employer or their boss. And so we've seen through Edelman a bit of a spike in trust towards business. Right. To me, that one thing business leaders need to remember is that doesn't mean you have a permission now, like whatever you say is true and everybody's going to believe you and you can skate into any waters you want to. Sure. And a challenge I've found over the last 4 years, one of the bigger challenges where increasingly companies are calling and not saying, hey, how do we deal with, new export controls, or how do you recommend us play the tax bill? But rather we're thinking about taking a stand on an issue, immigration or LGBTQ rights and a bathroom law that we tend to think is discriminatory, but it's not our business and it's not our core function. And we've probably got customers and employees on both sides of it. There's no playbook. Obviously, it's really important to me if it's about trust, you need to remember things like what you say matters less than what you do. And so if you are, shedding tears and giving speeches about inequality, and then your pay gap compared to your workforce is, ginormous. So all you did was give a speech. What are you doing to help people improve their education, to help people pay their rents? Actions definitely speak louder than words. And I think the trust gains by business leaders were more action driven than word driven. Although it also mattered that they weren't saying the pandemic's going to magically disappear. Mm-hmm. They weren't having the kind of the Cuomo brothers show while they were sending sick people back to nursing homes and then lying about the data. I mean, it's, businesses now today are being asked to weigh in increasingly on issues, particularly on voting rights, right, that are fraught, that are very political. And it's one of the biggest challenges over the last month that I've been asked to give advice on.
Well, and as you start to talk through those challenges, I mean, when folks come to you and say those things, are you weighing with them and saying, look, great, before we get into what you might say, let's talk about what you're doing on behalf of that first? Is that sort of part of the conversation?
Certainly when people are thinking about saying something, I suggest, well, the first question to always ask is, will this highlight hypocrisy?
Sure. Yeah.
If your actions aren't going to be matched by your soaring words, then either get off the dime and put some actual programs in place. And that's why I like to pick on Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan. Jamie has said good and important things on trying to deal with systemic racism, but he put $30 billion towards ending systemic racism in housing. That's serious action. Sure. And so for people who would want to complain about, the guy hasn't walked in your shoes or whatnot, that's to me a pretty game-changing amount of money, and so, yeah, I always suggest to folks that whatever you're going to say, if you want to talk about voting rights, well, do you give your employees time off to vote? Mm-hmm. If you don't, maybe you should, because that's something you can do right there at home. It's usually businesses would weigh in on things that were relevant to their business or specific to their customers. And we're seeing the trend more recent years are things like immigration, like LGBTQ rights that really aren't the core of their business, but are important to their employees or important to their customers, or areas where they feel that societally, like climate, if we don't do better, it will be bad for the business long term.
Sure.
Yeah, and I've been looking at some of the data around this, and it definitely spikes. Expectations of companies definitely spike when you see a large kind of event happen, like George Floyd's murder, or the riots on that happened, the insurrection on January 6th. And then you see it kind of fall off, or consumer expectations try to slowly kind of drop off of what they want the companies to do. But where I think you see the long-term impact is employee activism is only increasing. And I think reporters are on this beat heavily. There's not just one famous reporter that has a Substack that calls out a lot of companies. There are a lot of reporters now that are looking into this. And I think that alignment that you're talking about, you have to, if you're going to make a statement on, LGBT rights, you have to have, making sure that your own internal processes, like if I go and, register buy something on your company's website, and you don't have something that, the gender, description, clicking male or female is the only two options. Well, you're being discriminatory right there. There's so many things, that you don't provide a transcript potentially of your speeches, or, so that people that are, hearing disabled can't, potentially, listen to your podcast or listen to the content that you're producing on your website. There's all those types of things that organizations need to be thinking about. And constantly, we get asked this question a lot at the council, and there is no playbook. People want like an easy decision tree, like, if we've contributed to this, member of Congress, say, yes, has he been racist? No, like, okay, good. It doesn't work that easily. It's very complicated. And that's why I think internally you need to be making sure you're hiring really, sharp folks that are looking at all these different things and have the ability to go throughout the company and say, hey, what's our policy on how we work with China?
So you're right,
if we're
Nick.
talking about civil rights here in the U.S., are we going to be called out about our civil rights in China? Those types of things.
And a lot of businesses are. I've got so many attempted and thrown out flowcharts on the same thing. This, I hope, is the topic of my next quarter's analysis, which, God willing, I'll be able to crank out the rest of today and Saturday and Sunday to get it to a point where I can release it next week. I'm thinking a lot about it, and I like, one of the things I enjoy, it takes a ton of hours, but what I enjoy about it is it makes me think kind of more than the talking points. And when you actually try to write something, you learn that what you thought you knew or what you wanted to say doesn't hold up to the, its existence on paper. But in the topic that we're talking about, besides look at your actions, don't want to be hypocritical, you make a great point, and it's definitely one of my recommendations of have a team that already exists. That's the team that's going to have to think these things through, because it's not like they'll never come again. They're going to come more frequently. But another one is look at the team in question. One of the Zoom casts that I did was with a former CEO of Xerox, Ursula Burns, who I love. And I worked with her when she was CEO, and she's one of my favorite people. Just really smart, strong, makes you think. And she was saying after the murder of George Floyd, she starts getting all these calls from business leaders. And she's like, why is everybody calling me for advice and for thoughts and her conclusion was because like literally nobody has anybody on their senior team or on their board who looks like me. And so they're calling me because I'm the closest friend they have who's African-American female, and one of the first pieces of advice she said she was given to these guys is maybe you ought to have somebody on your team who has some more life experience so you don't have to call, a former CEO friend in London. And I really do think you need a standing team, and the team needs the diversity of both identity, but also ideology, so that you guys are really thinking through all of the angles.
And I think you hit on a really important point too, is like that it's not just a statement that you put together, that you sign on. I love what's going on with some like Civic Alliance and groups like that. But, what they're also doing behind the scenes of Civic Alliance is like building, GeoTV, corporate GeoTV programs, right? And they're also doing other things, but you need to be thinking about that elsewhere. Are you, if you're going to make a statement around something, are you going to put some lobbying firepower behind that? Or are you going to ask your employees to also, take part and sign a petition? And those are the next kind of level discussions if you're really going to be a leader on that issue. Otherwise, you might just be kind of, a follower, which is fine.
Yeah. You got to look
for some companies.
If your plan is to lead on every social issue that comes by, you're an NGO or a political party. You're not a corporation.
Sure.
So one of the earliest challenges is what's the threshold for making decisions? And
I was going to ask that because, Nick, you mentioned it earlier, and that's the other side of this. It's not, you're balancing both employee activism and just general activism out. And how do you sort of put that threshold together to talk to your employees or to talk to the public or whoever it is and say, well, why aren't you acting on this issue? You acted on that issue. And why aren't you doing this? You acted on that. And how do you even get to the bottom of where that threshold is with organizations? How do you consult them to say, hey, here's some of the things you should be thinking about when you decide whether or not to do something?
You're right. And you will be accused of being insincere, inconsistent, ineffective. Mm-hmm. So you'd like to be sincere. You'd like to be consistent. You certainly want to be effective.
Sure.
I've one of the things I hope to include in what I publish next week will be, at least how I try to think these things through. But like Nick and I both said, there is no formula.
Right.
And, if it clearly is relevant to your business, that's the most obvious case of why you'll be speaking out. If you make EV batteries, you're talking about climate smart.
Yes.
Patagonia talking about, protecting, open spaces. That's what they ought to be doing.
Right.
So if it's relevant to your business, if your customers are overwhelmingly on one side, I think of Colin Kaepernick as the pitchman for Nike. That's smart. That's a smart approach to the addressable market. So that's, people may not like it, but that's CEOs, it's the Nike CEO also recognizing that, brand really matters for his ability to be successful for his shareholders, for his company, for everything else. So that's another one. Mm-hmm. If your employees, if it's something, a really big deal, when Parkland shooting happened, both Delta and United Airlines, I think, ended a relationship each had separately, of course, with an affinity program they had with the National Rifle Association. When they asked United Airlines, they said, why? I said, because the child of one of our pilots was shot and killed. Yeah. And, the gun groups are like, leave them alone. The Delta folks who I think, were like, because we think it was bad, and they found themselves under more attack because it wasn't necessarily quite as obviously personal to their community And so the reaction to some felt like them, getting out of a lane that maybe, if it's your family that's affected, boy, that's pretty legit as to why you might decide that you're going to take an action or get involved. It's a question they have to ask is, you're going to be effective? You're going to be effective alone? The biggest question, and Nick, this is where you come in a lot of the time, is there's a lot of safety in numbers. Yeah. And if you're the only company that has decided that you want to go to war with the Democratic leadership or the Republican leadership, you're a pretty juicy target.
Right.
If it's the Fortune 500, good luck.
Dipping your toes back and contributing potentially to, the 147 members of Congress that didn't certify. Although all those things are questions that, other companies are looking around and saying, we're based in Texas, right? Like the majority of our caucus voted against certification. What do we do, type of thing? Or they're looking to see what their peers are. And another kind of question that keeps coming up is, is this ever going to return to normal, where everything's are not, as politicized? And I don't know if that's going to be the case. One of the things that I really take an interest in, like right wing kind of podcasts. I listen to like Dan Bongino, and then I do the same thing on the left. And on the right, the ads on Dan Bongino's podcast are like for cell phone companies that I've never even heard of, that are only for, conservative people, and for things that you've never thought about, of like, are we going to really, segment ourselves of like, well, I go to Liberty phone system or whatever it's called, because I don't want any of my, money going to Nancy Pelosi or something for my phone bill. And
look, Nick,
is this what's going to happen?
The word you just described, remember, rather than saying I was watching one of the 3 networks, you're talking about going to freaking Dan Bongino's podcast.
Yeah.
We've atomized information. We've atomized ideas to the extent association with ideology sells. Of course, people are going to do it.
Sure.
An interesting data point, I think last month, I thought it was Gallup, could have been Pew, one or the other. They're both excellent. Observed how now fewer than half Americans for the first time regularly attend religious services.
Sure.
Increasingly, our collective religion is hyper-partisan. Those are the tribes we belong to more than the institutions, kind of the post-bowling alone world. And so if brands can find ways to affiliate themselves with with the team you belong to or your ideology, you're more likely to be part of it. Many suggest that the Republican Party these days, under Donald Trump at least, is more of a lifestyle brand than an ideology-driven policy shop. I think there's a lot to that. It's the personification of being against the establishment, of feeling screwed by modernity, and believing that we've got to take power away from the globalists, take power away from big tech, take power away from big media, the elite establishment. That's the heart and energy of populism. And again, the Dems have currently found a way to keep it together. The Republicans have not.
Yeah.
As we kind of wrap up, this is super helpful. I'm reading Obama's biography. It's like 680 pages or something, and I'm halfway through, and I've been halfway through for like a month now. But in it, they talk about, after the Bush administration, they felt like every time they opened a drawer, there was another turd sandwich there left from, the administration, right? And I don't know if that's 100% true, because there was a lot of things going on, but I can't imagine that that's not the case with what Biden is kind of feeling, right? As the first initial thing was, let's get this big bill passed for COVID relief and pushing our economy forward. But I imagine as they start to open up some more drawers, there's going to be other issues that kind of pop up outside of infrastructure. What do you think is going to happen in the next couple of months for the Biden administration? What are there going to be their priorities that they can actually get passed? So there was a very tight Senate.
Yeah, there was a great on the bigger point, there was a great Ross Douthat, who's a writer at the New York Times, piece last weekend suggesting the unexpectedly large number of ways that Bidenism is like Trumpism, not in the, let's find ways to offend people on Twitter, but whether it's let's permanently pull out of Afghanistan, let's make infrastructure a priority, so much of the kind of the populist aim and energy and plenty of the policies, keep the China tariffs in place. They're blaming the Trump folks for not meaningfully expanding the capacity at the border to house and take care of more refugees, a surge of whom came mostly because I think the economy is here hot again, and the rest of the world is not nearly the place you want to be relative to the United States. It's safer, more, positive things, but also there have been, far less hostile to immigrant rhetoric from the administration, leading to more refugees thinking now's a better time to come. What is, who left the turd sandwich becomes a bit of a debate. I think the Biden guys, though, as I think about their mindset, first, they're thinking we're going to lose the House in the midterms because the margin's so small. Not for any fault of Speaker Pelosi, who's insanely impressive given the size of the margin at moving the troops. But you always lose some seats, and just some seats is all it takes to flip. Yeah. So I get the sense they're like, run hard, go big, go fast, don't wait. They look at the Republican Civil War, they think we're not going to get 10 votes, no way, no how, don't wait for them. They couldn't bring them if they wanted to. And with the Dem Civil War, as noted, they're like, keep the rhetoric and the style, and you'll win over the moderates. Policies, you win over the progressives, go charge. Yeah. They look atmospherically like the Fed's on their side, big business is on their side, and the mainstream media is on their side. Go big, go fast. Then you take a look at kind of the markets, and it's like, okay, we're in a relief rally with the stock market. Deficits don't seem to matter. The economy is going to grow between 6 and 8% this year, which is nuts. And if the vaccinations, you got yours, if the vaccinations continue to roll out, we may have a massive sense of we just survived a war. All of that will be a ton of positivity. In my mind, you take all of those things together, and then you throw in, remember, Joe Biden is having Doris Kearns Goodwin, and he's having historians talk about great presidents. Why do you ask for that in the first quarter of your presidency? And the reason is he wants to be great. Joe Biden aims to be transformational, not transitional like we kind of thought. He's not trying to be a moderate to bring back the politics of the Clintonism. He wants to be LBJ and FDR. There's never underestimate the power of somebody with a chip on their shoulder, but he is not going to throw away his shot. So they're going to be pedal to the metal, pushing for as much as they can get done with reconciliation in Congress. And whatever they can't get done through that, they're going to try to get done in the executive branch, trying to genuinely change the country.
Do you think that gives them a chance to win in 2022? Or do you think, typically, obviously, ruling parties do lose seats. It just happens. But is there a chance that going big and get to them that leeway that they didn't have before?
So so you said 2022, the midterms, we got to divide the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
The Senate, yes. I think they've got a fighting shot because, Pennsylvania is at best a jump ball. Now that it's an open seat, we'll see if Wisconsin's open. That'd be a jump ball. North Carolina, they got a shot at. Republicans are defending tougher to defend seats. The Dems, in theory, Arizona and Georgia are defenses. Maybe Nevada and New Hampshire, though those are bluer states. But I think the Dems, if they keep it together and if they, all this kind of relief energy, they could gain in the Senate. We'll see who Republicans recruit, because there's a civil war between, the Trump wing of the party says you got to recruit people who say the election in 2020 was stolen, which it wasn't, which people don't believe. That may lead to, like Christine O'Donnell, that may lead to witches and kind of crazy candidates on the Republican side. On the House side, you have to also throw in redistricting is more likely than not to throw more seats in the direction of the Republicans. And the Dems who have to defend are defending more purple seats that won't be as enthralled with the populist accomplishments of the would-be transformational Biden administration. It's possible they don't lose the House, but I wouldn't put money that they don't lose the House.
If you look at the states that are gaining seats, it's not going to be to the Democrats' advantage. I mean, states like Pennsylvania are losing them and Florida are gaining them. Those types of things are going to be real difficult with how state legislatures are. I feel like we could I don't know, fill another 3 hours of this. I know Joe Rogan does like a 4-hour podcast sometimes. I feel like you're the only guest that we could have that could really do something like that.
So
really
on next week's episode, Bruce will be back.
Yeah.
Bruce, this is
4 hours.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm gonna be on Rogan next week.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll send it an email.
As if.
This is fantastic, though. I mean, you have so many good points just in terms of ways of looking at things and just the future of different things and thinking through them, from the ease and of Zoom meetings and podcasts and breaking down those walls and bringing people together, to just the different ways that people need and organizations need to be thinking about what happens when an event happens. How do you put together, while there's no formula, putting together your team, putting together your people, putting together people that look like the people that are involved, making sure that everybody is on the same page, and then making a decision. It's just, there's so much here that's so great for all the folks who listen.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Of course. So with that, thank you again, Bruce. Nick, always great to see you as a co-host. Glad to see that you're all vaxxed up now and ready to go, and the UK is opening back up. We are the Advocacy Help Desk, a group of advocacy professionals who like to just come on, talk advocacy, talk issues, talk questions, talk answers. Thank you again for joining us, to both of you, and thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, as Andy Polk says, keep advocating.